Hello, everyone. I'm Adam from GFAM, and we have Andrew from Koinos, and we're here to talk about the things. Probably blockchain things, but who knows? Who knows where we'll go? How are you, Andrew?
I'm good.
Awesome. So I have liked Ray Dalio for a long time. I love the way that he researches things, but one big sticking point that he and I have always had has been Bitcoin. First, he would like compared it to like the tulip bulb market in back in the day. He said it was kind of a I don't know if he said it was a scam, but he said like there was no value in it. And then he eventually, after years, came around as like, yeah, I can see Bitcoin is an asset class. And then just recently, a few days ago, he said that he thinks there's a good possibility that the US would ban Bitcoin because it competes with the USD. What do you think about that? Is that concerning to you, or does it not really factor in at all?
Um, I think I strongly disagree with him on this, and I think I have a number of reasons why I think I could argue that he's wrong. Of course, it all depends on what his definition of a good chance is, which could be 2%.
I'm pretty
In
sure he was hedging his bets with that. I think his
yeah, yeah,
exact words were a good possibility or good
yeah,
potential or something like that.
yeah. Um, I, I think Ray's smart. I think the place I'd like to start in answering this question is kind of shifting the focus of what he said from whether Bitcoin will be banned and to why he was saying he thought it would be banned. And he kind of like breezed through it, but I actually agree with him on the why, not the outcome.
Yeah.
And what he was saying is, if things get so insanely bad in America that the federal government has to begin imposing restrictions on the economy, like foreign exchange. I mean, they did that in Iceland in 2008. That was the only country that I think they really did that in, and that was a big deal. So he's talking about a really bad situation, and
Which
so
he has kind of predicted that things were not going to go well for the US for some time now. Like a lot of his comparisons between like the China model and the US model, there's like the US might be in trouble here. So yeah, like I think he predicts that things aren't going to be great for the US based on their foreign policy and all that sort of stuff.
yeah, exactly. And so I mean, there's kind of a couple sides to it, right? So he's basically saying things will get so bad in the US that a highly desirable asset class like gold in the 1920s or 30s or whenever it
Yeah,
was, and Bitcoin now might be a target of the federal government, which is kind of like an underhanded compliment if you think about
yeah,
it. What he's
yeah.
basically saying is that this is obviously something that could capture a ton of value, that people could move a ton of capital, a ton more capital into, because even at the amount of capital that's in there right now, we're not talking about a threat to a national currency.
No.
So what he's talking about is so much capital is flowing into Bitcoin and out of the US dollar that the federal government is might target this asset class. And I think it's really important to just like let that sit in isolation as to what exactly he is saying. He's not saying, oh, this is something that's used for illicit transactions, and so the federal government should ban it because it's supporting criminal behaviors, you know. Um, and and to me, like the broader theme that I group this on under in my own mind is everything old is new again, because this all takes like NFTs, decentralized finance, the government banning Bitcoin. This all takes me back like 10 years ago, when it was new
Yeah,
and
yeah,
when nobody really understood it. And these were all the initial reactions, both on the good side and the bad side. let's use these things called non-fungible tokens. It's an old idea. Let's have decentralized finance. That was the idea behind BitShares. The government's going to ban it. That's what everybody was saying. And so, I think he's a boomer. I think he's, as smart as he is still that generation and has that background and has that mindset. And to me, the big thing is, in the 1920s, the US was still growing at an incredible rate. It experienced a Great Depression, but there had been incredible growth up until that point, and going through it and and after it, there was still incredible growth. What he is saying, and what I will agree with, is that the United States, the federal government of the United States, is in a fundamentally different position now than it was then. And
I mean, manufacturing was so huge back then. Like, America was the manufacturing hub of the world, and now it's not. And maybe that's fine. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't like it. I hope that we can bring back much more manufacturing to the United States. I actually think that we will. I do think that there will be like a serious phase of discomfort, this economic, these economic challenges that he's talking about. I 100% agree with. But back then, the federal government was growing. It was still small, and it still seemed highly effective. And so back then, it seemed, I think the population was much more willing to accept the kind of constraints that were imposed at the time. Also, because it was not a technological age. The internet did not exist. What could anyone do if the federal government says you can't use gold? And by the way, they didn't say, if I recall correctly, they didn't say, hey, you can't have gold in your house. I mean, maybe they did, maybe I'm misremembering, but it was stuff like you can't redeem it, you can't trade it, right? It's not going to do you any good.
Yeah.
So they
misremembering from your time in the 1930s.
Yeah.
Like, well, I was only 8, but as I remember, they knocked
right. I look great.
if we had gold.
Yeah. So and this is a physical asset that you have to exchange with other people. You have to go in. There are international markets. There are things that can be clamped down. When we're talking about things like Bitcoin, first of all, you shouldn't talk about Bitcoin without talking about the ever increasing number of additional cryptocurrencies that are out there. So you're talking about a peer-to-peer network, which are insanely difficult to shut down, and the government has never gone after peer-to-peer networks as such. They go after the people using them to do things. But the peer-to-peer and it's because they know they can't do anything about it because it's a peer-to-peer network. So if you add into the mix that there's something deeply wrong with the economy that he's referring to, right? Capital is fleeing the dollar. Faith and trust in the federal government is at an all-time low. It can't do anything. It's underfunded. Nobody trusts it. Why do you think Donald Trump was elected, right? So the idea that in this environment, the federal government is going to say, Bitcoin is now illegal, and that's not going to make more capital flood into Bitcoin. Shows me that, and other assets. Okay, ban Bitcoin. You think capital is not going to flow into Ethereum
like straight away?
Okay, so then they'll take another 10 years of going back and forth. But the thing is that all that money that's going to be flowing into crypto, that's going to go into lobbying. That's going to go into lobbying senators. I mean, you if you look at the mayor of Miami, like that's a perfect example of where things could potentially head, kind of in his worst case scenario. Like weirdly, the best case scenario for his outcome is faith in the federal government increases, the economy recovers, everybody loves the way things are. Nobody's really looking to experiment with cryptocurrencies or anything like that. And now the federal government goes, hey, you don't need this. Here's our digital currency. You don't need that digital currency. Honestly, that would be, I think, the bigger risk. I think it's highly unlikely. But if the idea is things are going to get so bad, and people are going to lose so much faith in the dollar, and so the federal government's going to come in, that's just going to incentivize more innovative solutions in the space, use of more private chains, things like Monero maybe. I don't think it would have the outcome that they'd want, and I think it would actually degrade confidence in the space.
Especially if there are large organizations, large American companies that have Bitcoin on their balance sheet.
Honestly, I just don't even know what he's thinking. You know, we live in a capitalist country, and it seems to me like it's more capitalist with every passing day. I'm not even saying that as a positive. Money is ruling everything. And the only thing the federal government, people have a degree of confidence in with respect to the federal government, is how it prints and distributes money. Look at, you know, the stimulus, right? Nobody believes they can enforce anything, that it's maybe they would, maybe in an act of desperation, but to me that would be as much a death knell to the existing system as to Bitcoin itself.
I think I always forget that the United States do have very different state laws. So, you know, like lots of places have legalized marijuana, but it's still banned or illegal federally. So, you know, there's lots of weed shops popping up all through different states. Like it's a $1 billion industry, and yet I think it's still federally illegal. So yeah, like the feds could come in and raid these shops, but they're never going to. There's too much money behind it. They're established businesses within the states. So yeah, like America has that weird dynamic between the states and the federal government as well that is unusual.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think what some people, maybe older people, have difficulty wrapping their mind around is how technology can grow, how rapidly it can expand its reach, and how rapidly it can adapt. And so, you know, he's thinking, it feels like he's applying a very linear logic, which, you know, I know he's too smart to do.
Yeah.
But it's like, in 10 years, Bitcoin has acquired a market capitalization of $1 trillion. In 5 years, there could be 20 cryptocurrencies with $1 trillion capitalizations. Maybe.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin might have a $30 trillion valuation. How do you go to bat against that? And even if you do, that might just push more capital into things like Koinos. And this kind of highlights one of the advantages of Koinos as a protocol, is that it's designed to evolve and adapt. And so now the reason for that design is so that it can rapidly adapt to the needs of developers and their end users. But if those developers and end users are people who are going, oh, my Bitcoin is illegal, I want wrapped Bitcoin, I want some kind of asset that is roughly, you know, aligned with Bitcoin, but is not Bitcoin, it will just spur a burst of innovation, of people coming out and designing new applications and new currencies specifically geared at getting around whatever regulations you put in place. And I do not believe that unless we become military dictatorships or something wild where it's like, dude, we should be talking about other things if that happens, not Bitcoin. But they're not,
Bitcoin's
you
the
know,
least
they're
of
not,
our worries at that point.
yeah, they're not going to go to, they're never going to ban running a computer, right?
Yeah.
Running a node, running a piece of software on your computer that sends bits over a peer-to-peer network. That's never going to happen, you know? So yes, most other protocols really can't adapt. And, you know, and so Koinos might have an advantage in that kind of environment. I mean, it kind of, that the whole idea is that it has an advantage in every environment. That's the beauty of evolution. But, you know, even with Bitcoin, if they release some kind of regulation or law, I'm pretty sure you'd see that protocol move pretty fast and those developers roll out some change,
Yeah.
you know, that makes it okay, not part of that law. Okay, so you're going to ban the name Bitcoin? They'll change the name Bitcoin.
I guess like I hadn't really thought of like the decentralized exchanges as well. Like, so I guess, you know, if Bitcoin was banned, like they could go after Coinbase or Bitfinex or whatever, but like a decentralized exchange, like a Uniswap or something, like how do you go after that? There's no real owner necessarily.
This whole time, for the last 10 years, every time people say ban, the government will ban it, I go, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm pretty expert in this domain and I just don't understand what that would look like. Like
Right.
going back to the Ray Dalio thing, so, you know, I'm remembering a little bit about how the financial system worked back then when I was 8, as you know. But back then, the dollar was partially backed by gold.
Right.
So it was a totally different financial system. And the whole justification for the ban on gold was because when things happened with gold, it would destabilize the currency because basically the dollar was pegged to gold.
Right.
So if you had these violent fluctuations, it would be devastating for the economy. And so they had to do stuff like that to make sure that the economy didn't collapse worse. And honestly, if I were back then, I would argue in defense of those maneuvers. There were no alternate currencies. The dollar itself wasn't a digital currency. The dollar is a digital currency now. It's not a gold pegged asset. It's certainly not a Bitcoin pegged asset. So the idea that you can draw that parallel between then and now, look, Ray Dalio's smart. He's not, I wouldn't even call him a genius. And it's not like he's never been wrong. And I think on this one, he's just wrong. He's just out of touch. He's just not a technologist. You know, he's certainly not an engineer. So what does he know about this stuff? You know, he just knows, I think what Ray Dalio isn't a genius, but the way that he's been able to distinguish himself from his peers is through his study of history.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you know, what's that great expression that I've heard Vitalik say? It's like,
past performance.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, it rhymes, but it doesn't repeat itself. And so I think he's just kind of out of his depth, as so many from the traditional economy are when they start looking at the decentralized economy. Capital will continue to flow into the decentralized economy. Decentralization is a trend that I believe is here to stay. It's part and parcel to the technological revolution. Digital technology decentralizes things.
Yeah.
So to roll that back would be like saying we're going to roll back digital,
Yeah. We're going back to landlines. Everything.
Yeah, we're going back to
landlines.
analog.
Yeah.
Exactly. Anything not analog is banned. That they're going to ban non-analog
Yeah.
technology.
All our robots must be made out of wood from now on.
Yeah. Yeah, and gears.
I guess, like, I hadn't really thought of that, but I guess back in the day, if gold became, I don't know, unpopular, or if there was a new shipment of gold that came in from somewhere, that would actually make like exports of, I don't know, kettles so much cheaper if the USD was pegged to gold. Is that kind of right? Like, so like something happening in gold would actually have this far effect on exports over here.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And there were many instances where influx and outflow of gold had dramatic consequences on the US economy. In fact, I think there's a paper, I don't think it was by Bernanke, but it might have been, about the cause of the Great Depression. And yeah, I mean, there were, for example, like two big things come to mind. One is there would be, and I don't remember the exact details, but there would be scenarios where like a country would be like, hey, I want my gold back.
Oh,
you know, and so
right.
that would be, so there would be this massive outflow of gold, and the money supply would remain the same. But there's another situation, and I think this might actually be equally as devastating, if not more. It might, but there can be influxes. If there's influx
Yeah.
of gold, that can be a problem too, because
it would devalue the dollar, which would then cheapen exports.
no, I think it would increase the value of the dollar because the money supply stays the same.
Oh.
And now you've got all this gold. It's weird. Honestly, I've looked into this a number of times and it's so hard to wrap my mind around, because for me, what's super intuitive, and I think this explains why like I entered the crypto space. To me, it's super intuitive that like all money is tokens, and tokens have no intrinsic value, and it's really just about their connection to some narrative. And so you create these tokens out of thin air and you distribute them. If you distribute them right, you have economic growth. If you distribute them wrong, you don't. You have inflation. So that always made intuitive sense to me. And ironically, like this idea, well, and I guess it explains a lot, like this idea that money should be backed by something never made intuitive sense to me. And so when you go back and you look at that economy, and you look at the economic crises that unfolded as a result of the gold backing, it's so
wild.
Magic math to me, where it's like the gold's come in, we've got to print more dollars. How do we get these? There's not enough dollars in the economy because we've got all of this gold now, or now we don't have this gold. And I think what it boils down to is that the price, like the price mechanism, like there was an explicit price mechanism as opposed to having like a kind of floating thing where it's like, yeah, we've got backing, but the price is market. There would be like explicit price consequences to how much gold was being held in banks. And so if the gold moves, or if more gold comes in, there would be an instant price impact on the dollar.
Right.
And so now, okay, all of a sudden my dollar is worth a lot more. That's deflation, and that's actually bad.
Yeah.
Of course, now my dollar's worth a lot less. That's inflation. That's also bad. So that's why like a stable currency is so important for national economies. And that's why they had to impose those kinds of regulations. How he can make the parallel between that and Bitcoin. I mean, if the dollar was backed by Bitcoin, which I am not advocating for, it would make more sense to me.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, when I hear him talk about it, it just sounds like old fuddy-duddy,
Yeah, 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 and part of that, like, I do think that is a factor, right? Um, especially the older generations, like, I never made my money this way. I don't really understand it. I don't want to understand it, and I don't want it to be true because I already made my money through these other mechanisms, right? Which your thing might devalue my thing. Like, money has always gone into stocks, but obviously crypto has like diverted some of that money that would have gone into stocks or bonds or whatever into crypto. So yeah, it's almost yeah, I remember like getting really annoyed with my dad because all of the media he consumed was saying that Tesla was definitely going bankrupt. And all the media I was consuming was like, this is an amazing company that's doing amazing things. Like, there's no chance. And just like that difference in mindset is really frustrating. And it's just, it is that generational gap.
Yeah. So we're trying to materialize these versions of the future that we have in our mind. And some of us have like ambitious visions of the future.
Yeah.
Some of us have pessimistic visions of the future. And that's kind of the weird thing. Like when you see people who are just unhappy forever, it's so sad because they're actualizing their own
Right.
negativity, right?
Yeah.
But this also happens at scale. And so if you take Ray Dalio, who's 60 years old, right? The last 60 years has been those people building a shared narrative together, building a shared world, creating all of this wealth, building a world that had upsides and had downsides. And maybe they really like the upsides and they don't mind the downsides, or they just view the downsides as being a cost of doing business
Yeah.
In the good world. But now is a new time. People have different visions of the future, more sustainable visions of the future, more equal visions of the future, less unequal or unequal visions of the future, more technologically advanced. We want to go to Mars. We want to drive electric cars. We don't care.
And we've also got very different problems to solve as well.
We've got much more different problems to solve that I don't want to say they caused them, but they seem to have emerged from the way that they did things.
Yeah.
We had electric cars at the beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And it was possible to see the long-term consequences of burning this fossil fuel. Anyone with half a brain could deduce that eventually gasoline would run out.
Yeah.
It was known to be a finite resource. And it's not like the difference between electric cars and gas cars was that big of a deal at that time.
Yeah.
I think what probably happened was that there was a lot more money to be made in the gasoline industry in pulling gasoline out. We had gasoline while we had oil in America. There was just more money and more industry to be made on gasoline. And so that's what wound up winning.
Yeah.
But we could have avoided it. They didn't avoid it. They had this mindset that you see expressed in many different domains of this idea of things that are super big, you can't change them. you can release as much CO2 into the atmosphere as you want because the atmosphere is so big. You
Yeah.
can dump as much as you want into the ocean because the ocean is so big.
Yeah.
You know, nothing can change the market because the market is so big. You know, it was very, I mean, it was the beginning of industrialization was new, technology was new, science was painfully new. They just knew so little about the world. And now we know so much more. We have so much more information at our fingertips.
Yeah. Exponentially
and,
more.
And yeah, and it's just, it's hard for us to keep up with it. It's hard for me to keep up with it.
Right.
And I learn new things every day. And this is a space that I'm, you know, working at the cutting edge of, and I'm still learning. So
imagine all the things you'll know in 10 years.
Yeah. It's true. Although, you know, to counterpoint, it's, you know, the more I learn, the more I realize that, you know, it's about going back to basics, it's about simplicity.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost the classics. It's that argument in going back to the classics. You know, yeah, obviously there's technology involved, and there's difficult engineering problems to understand. But even at that level, it's remarkable how often the solution ultimately is removing something, eliminating a piece. So hey, maybe we just eliminate all cryptocurrencies, like Ray Dalio says, and I don't
know. Yeah, that doesn't seem so simple at this particular junction.
Yeah, no.
Those damn kids with their computers always ruining everything.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the other thing he's failing to integrate is just these other trends, like the trend towards privacy. Apple is what? Is Apple the biggest company in the world? Apple is so much more powerful than the federal government of the United States. So much more powerful. And we've seen this when they go to battle with it. When the United States is like, hey, we want a backdoor, and they're like, nah.
Yeah.
No. You know, and so 5 years from, and Apple is explicitly and aggressively marketing itself as a privacy play. And do I think they think that's the right thing? Yes. Do I think that they also realize that that's where people are trending, and that that's where nobody wants less privacy. Nobody wants less ownership. Nobody wants less money. These are going to be trends that you should not go against. There's a great expression, there are no political solutions, only technological solutions.
Oh, I've never heard that.
Yeah, I think it's a French philosopher or something. I believe it 100%. And to me, what it means is that, well, one of the consequences of it is that where institutions, including governments, get themselves into deep doo-doo is when they forget that there are no political solutions, only technological solutions. And so they disconnect themselves from the real solutions. And that's what leads to distrust and dissatisfaction and ineffectiveness, is when the political system views itself as somehow higher than the real economy, than technological solutions, than the real things that people are doing and the real businesses that they're building, and they think that they can just impose law. And I can't help but see an expression of that, like still like a little seed of a belief in Ray Dalio's mind, when he says that that generation has an idea that just because the government says it's so, will make it happen. It's a very godlike, and not by accident. It is, that is not a metaphor. I don't mean it metaphorically. There has always been an intermingling of religion and government. And yes, in America, yes, we have created more distance, but that heritage is still there.
Yeah.
You
Absolutely.
know, and I think that's what's dying the most right now. And that's what Bitcoin started or really accelerated. Bitcoin was a result of this. Bitcoin was a symptom of this, but it really poured gasoline on the fire, including by open sourcing its own technology.
Yeah.
So you just had, like, when we were getting involved in this, how difficult was it to explain to people that you could create money and it had value and it could be worth anything?
Yeah. Yeah.
They were just like, you're an idiot.
That you're gonna give me $20 for this rock?
Yeah. But look at where we are today.
Right.
Everybody knows what Bitcoin is. Everybody is interested in it. They don't have to love it. Everybody takes it as a given now that you can create digital tokens out of thin air and that those tokens can have a price. And to me, that's always been the thing. Like, and I know you've actually heard me say it a number of times now, but people get confused with value and price. And they use value a lot when price might be a better word for you, because it's a lot simpler to understand. I mean, people forget value. People didn't believe Bitcoin would have a price.
Yeah.
They didn't believe it would be worth 5 cents or $1. And my attitude was like, what if it's worth 1 cent? That would be stunning if it was worth 1 cent. And here's the thing, because of that, if it would be stunning to be worth 1 cent, because what that would prove, not because it's just inherently stunning, but because of what it would prove. If it could acquire a price of 1 cent, then it could acquire a price of $1,000.
Yeah.
That it can acquire any price would be the miracle. And so the moment that happened, it would almost have to go up, because it would prove that something nobody believed could happen. And now when we look at where we are, where this morning I watched Saturday Night Live explain what NFTs were in a way that is like legitimately, maybe we'll put it on our website. Like, I don't think I need to do an NFT explainer video anymore. I can just, they literally said it. It's a non-fungible token. It's unique. I'm like, what is happening? What world am I in?
Yeah, it doesn't really get much more mainstream than that, honestly.
No, they're literally doing explainer videos. And if you even take a step back, how are people viewing that video? They're viewing it on YouTube. And, go back 10 years and people were saying similar things about YouTube.
Right. Yeah.
And now when I watch that, it's not just that it's on YouTube. It's not just that they're talking about NFTs, but they're catering to the YouTube audience.
Exactly. They knew that was going to be popular.
They knew that was going to be popular. So they are not moving popular culture. No. They are being moved by internet culture.
Yeah. In order to stay relevant, they did something that we would engage with.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't know how the federal government, our existing governmental structures are not well suited, cannot function in this environment. That is what's happening.
Yep.
That is kind of what he's getting at when he says like they'll go after Bitcoin. But it's like, it reminds me of those conversations where it's like, when you're talking about Bitcoin going to $1 million, and you're like, yeah, but that means the dollar is worth zero. You know,
Yeah.
it's like the federal government banning Bitcoin. Well, maybe that will be because at that point the federal government is like the mayor of Des Moines. You know, like it's this tiny little thing
Yeah.
that has
Yeah.
no money, that
Yeah.
has no value. Nobody's buying the bonds anymore. You know, it's just become this relic, almost like the monarchy, you know,
Yeah.
like it
Yeah.
may be that.
I mean, governance can be decentralized. So then at what point do we less need a centralized government?
Yeah, well, and it can be decentralized in a couple of ways. And honestly, an argument that's resonated with me um, is the breaking up of the United States into like 4 territories. And you know, that's a kind of decentralization too. And you know, the federal government might remain as some kind of like higher layer,
Yeah.
you know, that is like maintaining the national currency and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
But really, you're gonna have, but maybe you have these bigger territorial governments that are sitting on top of the states. I mean, look, Texas and California, like these, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
granted, most of California is moving to Texas, but you know, but we've got these very different places. And
Yeah.
now add on top of this, you know, all these states have incredible pension burdens. They have
Yeah.
all kinds of fiscal burdens. And what happens to the first state that like offers a bond on a crypto, you know, on
Yeah.
a blockchain
Yeah.
and raises $1 trillion? Every state.
What does Wyoming need $1 trillion for?
Who doesn't want $1 trillion? Well, yeah, sure. It might be, yeah. What if they you know, they release a bond on a blockchain for Bitcoin? You know,
Yeah.
so they get, you know, and they raise $1 trillion, not $1 trillion. They raise, they raise 1 million Bitcoin.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and I think things like these, like we see with the mayor, you know, it's hard to predict these things because they're so new and there's so nothing has been done like it in the past. But if you do look to the past, you can see things that rhyme. Like originally, states did release bonds. I mean, states sell bonds, sell like municipal bonds to fund things, you know, and if the
And considering
dollar is
that the states don't always get the help they need from the federal government, that actually seems more likely than not.
Yeah, exactly. And so if we think about these different blockchains like Koinos, like Bitcoin, like Ethereum, as these nascent economies, you know, thousands of people, millions of people pooling their capital together, implementing different technologies, different governance structures, some of which will suck in even more capital. These blockchains could become extremely powerful if they're able to, you know, leverage their economic might effectively. Now, I will say that when I look at other platforms, I don't know if I see those mechanics there.
Yeah.
Like with Bitcoin, right? There's tons of capital in there, but how does it get mobilized? This is why I actually agree with his point that Bitcoin is very bubbly. I think it's just inherently volatile
Yeah.
because you can't do anything really with it. But as we've discussed before, what you can do with it is use it as a gateway into these other things, these other computing platforms that are digitizing governments. They're digitizing economies, and they're connecting people in all kinds of ways. Now, of course, when I look at Ethereum, when I look at EOS, when I look at other platforms, I see chaos. I see no progress. I do not see how they mobilize capital in any kind of intentional way that isn't just like short-term pump and dump schemes like with NFTs. Yeah, Ethereum capital is mobilized to inflate the game of the day, whether it's DeFi or ICOs or NFTs. But as far as targeting a governmental cause, we're still a ways off from that. And but I do feel like Koinos has the right bones for that, with its upgradability, but also with the design of its governance. Maybe it's being overly optimistic, but if you can't improve at a rapid rate, if you can't pivot rapidly in practically real time, it's going to be slower for you to do anything. And I think we just see an overall lack of sophistication. I mean, it's nice to see NFTs on SNL, but they're Beanie Babies.
Right.
That's where we are at this point.
Yeah.
Like the most popular use case is Beanie Babies. I mean,
So have you
Hasbro solved that problem.
submitted...
Like whoever manufactures, trolls or Beanie Babies. Right?
Have you submitted a US flag change where it just says like America run by Koinos?
No, I haven't.
Not yet.
Is that
Not yet.
something?
I think there's something in that. But like, yeah, I think you're right. Like in terms of what Koinos can do for many different industries, including governance, it does seem like, it could be an engine behind a lot of different industries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's my hope, what we're trying to produce is something that the people in government can say, hey, we can use this to help us raise funds. Hey, we can use this to understand what people want from their government. I mean, one of my pet use cases is I should be able to have my like voting preferences just accessible, just so that they can query it and they go, why are you doing polling? I'll just put it out there. This is what I want. And now you can implement your government that way. But yeah, I think sometimes I like to think of Koinos as a very American protocol. We're all currently American team members. I'm not like, some super nationalist or anything like that. And I look forward to expanding the team beyond Americans. But the adaptability of it, and also our governance structure is actually very reminiscent of America's tripartite governance. So checks and balances.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I don't really see in other blockchains and is going to be a cornerstone of the Koinos governance is separation of powers, which I think of as a very American concept. I think it is, because I think it is a very American concept, but it's highly effective in security as well.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, we call it segregation of duties, where
yeah,
people can't.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Segregation of duties is philosophically the same. It's like, it's the same, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, my hope is, I think it would be, my hope is that we can get Koinos out fast enough, and we can get organized, you know, by reducing the barriers to entry, by making it just zero friction, practically zero cost to begin experimenting with this technology, with blockchain technology. I mean, that's really what Koinos is. It's really just a protocol for making a blockchain, like the database structure, super accessible to any organization. And then by thoroughly decentralizing it, that means that it becomes this neutral substrate that is kind of like apolitical in nature, where you can't shut it down. Nobody owns and controls it. So all you can do is use it. And I feel like if they just use it, it would be much better for everybody. If the people in government adopt instead of resist the technology, it would be so much better for everybody. And I believe, this may be the romantic in me, but from what I've seen of how the government has dealt with crypto, you know, I think we were much more worried when it started.
Yeah.
And I think instead what we've seen is that people in government aren't that stupid. You know, they know that technology can produce massive amounts of wealth. You know, they know who signs their checks. You know, there's a lot of Facebook and Google signatures.
Yes.
On those. And I think that history, there's a good chance that history won't repeat itself, or at least I think this is something that we can impact. This is why with Koinos Group, the company, and with Koinos, the protocol, we have never taken an adversarial or aggressive or exclusionary approach with how we talk about it. You know, we don't single out any political group. It's not right. It's not left. And that's because we don't want to interfere with the ability for it to be adopted to make everybody's life better. If you're building something that can improve every system, I mean, when I first got into crypto, I mean, my life story, my psychology is looking around at systems and seeing things that are broken. And I think that this is what makes people engineers. Now, I'm not technically an engineer, but I get along really well with engineers. And there was a time when I considered being an engineer, but I think that that's the thing about engineers.
You're an engineer of the law.
Yeah. Well, there actually there is this very similar mindset.
Yeah, totally.
In law and in engineering, and I think me and my teammates, what motivated us to get involved with blockchain and the way we kind of think about it is, what is the root problem. And how do you knock out that peg? And so you look around and you see all of these broken systems. What is the highest impact thing you can do to knock out the bottom peg? And okay, that makes it sound like I'm trying to collapse the systems, but make
No, but
better
there's lots
systems.
of systems that are very like about to fall down because of like a little peg that's holding the whole thing up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, my metaphor is getting muddied. I mean, what I want
You're essentially
is,
trying to build something that's robust from the start.
yeah, yeah, and that enables other systems to come up
Yeah.
and to replace those systems. I mean, all systems die. I mean, that's the, I think
Yeah.
that's,
And that's fine.
and that's fine. Yeah, if you accept that all systems die, I think it's when people, believe that a system will live forever, that's where they tend to run into problems, because that's basically a religion.
Yeah.
And so all you can do is try to like reform systems, replace systems, create new systems, and systems that are designed uh, that are have fundamentally better foundations, so that what gets built up on top of them is inherently better. And so when we're talking about a blockchain platform, what we're saying is, effectively, wouldn't everything be better from more openness? Wouldn't everything be better from more transparency? Wouldn't everything be better if there were fewer people who had power, and power was distributed or decentralized among more people? Yes, everything would be better. I was just having a conversation with my brother about this, and he was like, if there is to be a downside, if there is to be a negative, look at all the negative things there are with the internet. What would they be? And I'm sure there will be negatives. I'm sure we'll look back and we'll say, oh, there are all these things we don't like about it. But it's really hard for me to get into that mind space, because to me, there is so much more we can do in terms of openness, transparency, and decentralization. And if we make more of that, things will be better, to me.
Yeah.
In my mind. And I think to everybody,
I
it's
think if
like,
you go in with the mindset of trying to control something, then that's you're only gonna come up against people who don't want to be controlled and find loopholes around that. Where I think if you just try and create a system where people are incentivized to do the right thing, or to do the thing that you want them to do, it will be better. Like everyone's working together.
yeah. And I think, it's funny, I realize we've come back around to the world's kind of most simple idea. And it connects kind of all this stuff together with respect to America and the government, and Koinos being a very American kind of protocol, and things that make everything better, and things that everyone agrees make everything better. It's freedom. People always want more of it.
Yeah.
Nobody ever wants less of it. It's such a loaded term,
Yeah.
and it means such different things to so many different people.
Yeah.
But like, if you think about what we're talking about, right? The ability to launch any kind of application you want, any kind of money you want, to be on a platform that nobody owns or controls, so you can do anything. It really comes down to freedom. And so, right? And what is banning Bitcoin? That is depriving people
It's
of
a
the
lack of
freedom
choice.
to hold a specific cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
And this, when the federal government is at its weakest, mean, people want freedom more than ever before, you know, and these technologies, they're really freedom technologies. Um, and when I think of Koinos, right, I'm just talking about the tools surrounding this freedom technology that just remove the friction to add it into any system and maintain sustainability, right? So it's like institutions, organizations of all types are going to be in a position where they can say, I can integrate this technology and I can deliver better services, and I can be better capitalized.
With better incentives.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, look, as much as as romantic as I am, money rules. You know, the most consistent determinant of human behavior is what gives them more money. And so, and
Which is really just the chase for freedom, right? Like there is that, like, you know, I want the most money, but most people are like, I just want enough money so that I can do whatever it is that I want to do.
I think so. I think that's what people really want. I mean, I think we might be talking about kind of two different things.
Sure.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I think that is what unifies people, is that, you know, that they see money as a way of getting their freedom. So, you know, but I also think there's something deeper in us.
Yeah.
And we just love the tokens. We just love like we have some deeper understanding of it, and I
Yeah. I
resist the
think there's a
kind of
competitiveness that has always existed.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's the competitiveness, which, you know, is like we were talking about before. If you understand it, if you accept it, it's fine.
Yeah.
And the point I was trying to make was that, you know, say you have some state government which realizes that it can integrate this technology in a way that can give it access to more capital, which
Yeah.
it will be able to
Yeah, absolutely.
in anywhere between 5 to 20 years. It will be able to. So now the federal government comes in and says, no, you state can't do that. I mean, maybe that's how we have this breakup of the nation, is where the interests of the state, you know, the financial interests of the state begin to conflict with that of the federal government, because really that's the function that the federal government really provides. That's really the foundation of its power,
Yeah.
is that a state can't have a national currency. A state can't really, basically, a state really mitigates its risk um, by having a common debt with a network of states. And so, you know, one state can default, and you've got this federal government that is there to bail it out. Like, a state can't do that by itself, by
Yeah.
definition.
Yeah.
And but that's kind of because a state could never really develop the level of trust and confidence it needed to create its own currency. But that's changing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that might be the thing. That might be the straw, you know.
Yeah. So I don't know about America, but in Australia, like, the federal government really had no power until they took on income tax. So because they took on income tax, they got the majority of tax, and then they distributed it out to the states. But before that, they had no power whatsoever. So yeah, you could kind of see a similar situation where, if the states don't need funding from the federal government because they've got access to their own capital, then, you know, it does potentially start to break things up a little bit. It's like, well, I just don't need what you're providing anymore.
Yeah, well, an interesting point. I do believe it was the exact same thing in the United
Okay,
States
sure.
with respect to the income tax, which is interesting because I didn't know that about Australia, but maybe that's a common theme. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I thought this was going to be a 3-minute stream where you just like, no, don't agree, end the recording. But no, this has been super, super interesting. Like, it's definitely went down a path I didn't know we were going to go down. But yeah, it's super interesting just following those thought patterns of what it essentially boils down to, like, what is governance? What is capital? Like, all those sorts of things. And really, like, if someone tried to shut down Koinos, they could shut down your company, but there'd still be these nodes all over the world that were running Koinos, and same with Bitcoin and same with everything else, really. So unfortunately, Ray, we think you might be wrong this time.
Sorry.
He'll be all right. He'll be fine.
Yeah, he'll cry himself to bed in a
Mountains
Scrooge
of money.
McDuck pool of money.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this chat once again. Always a pleasure, and we'll see you again.
Yep. Always
Thanks.
a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.